You got it? Shh. Thank you, guys. All right, well, I appreciate everybody coming tonight. I know that you had a lot of places you can choose to come, especially tonight with the pretty bad weather we're having here in Texas, which is rare because I felt like I was actually in Seattle. I don't know if you guys been to Seattle. It's always raining. Well, Austin was kind of one of those days here today. So just wanted to appreciate you guys coming. Hopefully, how many of you is the first time you come here? All right, so we have some newcomers, and probably the rest of you are been here before. So hopefully we're actually making this exciting for this year, starting 2020. I'll go through the whole slide here. Pretty much that's me, one of the founders. My wife, she's not here, but she's here in spirit, I guess you can say. Robbie, I want to bring him over here. He's actually one of the community directors. He probably helped you check yourself out and check in. And Jan, but Robbie, you want to say something? Are you good? Okay. Well, his background is a developer. He has a software company. Just to give you a heads up what he does. Shao, she'll be talking later. She's also a volunteer and helps out here with the event and organizes it, of course. Was today pretty much you guys did the mingling, making the announcements, and we'll have the speeches and the keynote speaker, and then we'll mingle a little bit more, and we have to be out of here by 9, but actually I'm cutting off at 8:50, hopefully. Then you can go downstairs and network more and, do a couple of, I guess, exchange phone numbers and, bar hopping too. You're down, 6th Street's right there, except for the weather, so I don't know how bar hopping is going to go. Just don't flip or trip. This is our sponsors. Capital Factory provides the space. As you can see, this is beautiful. You can see the Capitol because it's really dark tonight, but usually you can see it. Your Way Sports is my wife nonprofit, volleyball club. You have kids, come talk to me. I'll tell you a little bit about it. TCRE is actually Texas Capital Investment, Capital Real Estate. We invest in real estate properties. So this is how I fund this event and the tech map. So you guys know this is not actually a lot of sponsors. So we're looking for sponsors. If you know any, would love to have you, and also media people. This is how it started. It started with a map called the Tech Map, just to help everybody out where the startups were, where the fundings were, co-working spaces, and people kind of, get to know about Austin, especially so for a few of you that are newcomers and never been to Austin. Well, that's how it started, and then pretty much it blew up that now we're, in Europe and Asia and other places that we have people map and show their companies there. From there, we started creating profiles because, amazingly, startups change names or they disappear. So unless you die, we still have your profile. So that's why we started creating the profile itself. And then we have the dots, which is kind of tells you who they are, like yellow, other marketing, red, developers, blue, entrepreneurs, and green, investors, which kind of goes into the color dot scenario to help you network better to see who you actually want to connect with, who you're looking for at this event. Then we created jobs because we figured people that are coming here, developers, are actually looking for people to connect for jobs. So people that are pitching here can also post the jobs. It's all free on our platform. You can set up a calendar events on our platform and also can chat with people and follow up with them. This is how your profile looks on the tech map. You can list what you're looking for, if you want to get higher, if you're funding or not funding as an investor or not. This is our chat, which we haven't used it too much. It still says beta because we don't use it that often, but it definitely works if you want to connect with others. And this is the format for the pitches tonight. They have 5 minutes for pitching, 4 minutes Q&A, and then you'll be cut off after that. And then after we have the two companies that are pitching tonight, we'll have the keynote speaker come up and he'll talk for 10 minutes, and then the rest will be Q&A. And at this point, I would like to bring out the first company pitching. It's Tixpeer. Is that correct? Thank you. So this is your presentation. It's up there. So if you want to just slide, just go back and forth like this.
Okay.
I don't have the clicker today.
All right. Ready?
I'd like you to think back to the last live event that you attended. It might have been a music festival, a concert, a business conference, something like this, or even an experience like skydiving. I'd like you to think about the network that you created, the memories that you made, and how much it costs to go to that event. Now ask yourself, was it worth it, and would you do it again? Probably. These events can change our lives, but the problem with these events is that they have a very high upfront cost. These events, music festivals in 2019 cost upwards of $380. A single seat to go see Tony Robbins was upwards of $1,200, and a single ticket to the Super Bowl cost almost $4,500. Because of this upfront cost, I created TixBuyer. It's a point-of-sale lending platform that offers low-cost event payment plans to any event. Now, the ticketing industry in the United States alone, including sports, music, comedy, and special events like Tony Robbins, or even this, is well over $20 billion and growing every year. So how are we going to make this company profitable? We've got 4 major sources of income. We've got payment plans directly on our website where a user can come and request a payment plan to any event. Partnerships that follow the same rules where at the point of checkout, our software can be integrated. That's our bottom line. And then coming soon, later down in the pipeline, we're looking at monthly and yearly subscription memberships as well as points and perks programs. So diving a little bit deeper into our payment plans, we've got payment plans directly on our website where a user can not only go and check out with the events that we offer, but request a ticket to any event, music, skydiving, luxury travel, you name it. They can request these events up to the day of the event for a flat 10% fee. We never mark it up. We don't charge interest. And users that are returning in good standing can lower their fees to as low as 3%. Diving deeper into our partnerships, the same rules apply. Again, these partners can be anything and already have established. We've already established partners in travel and comedy and sports and music. They also will be able to offer those tickets up to the day of the event and possibly even up to the point of sale where they offer the physical ticket at the gate for a 5% fee. They pay us 5% on the back, and customers pay 5% on the front end when they check out. So here's a little bit of data on our market. This is from 2018. Almost half of millennials that took a massive survey attended a concert or music festival 2 years ago. They were one of 32 million attendees attending over 800 music festivals in the United States, where average tickets were almost $400. And they were willing to travel almost 1,000 miles to go to one of 5 of the top music cities in the world, Austin being one of them. Again, that's music alone. So there is some competition in the space of point-of-sale lending, but not events. So Klarna and Affirm, as well as Afterpay, charge an interest rate up to 30%. 2 of them do a soft credit check, which we do not. And most of them don't offer tickets to any event. They focus on products and goods like clothing, purses, appliances, what have you. So if you would like to see a demo, contact me after this. Let me know if you're interested. We have a 2-way API. We've got a mobile app in development, all those good things. I won't harp on that. Now, one of the 2 reasons that I'm here is I've worked a lot on this project over the last year and a half, but I'm not a technical person. And I'm looking for somebody or people that are inspired to do something big, have some sort of financial or technical or legal background, and would like to jump on something and work with me to make it something bigger. The second reason I'm here, in the next 6 months, I would like to raise an initial round of funding in some sort of note or equity. And again, if you're interested to know more of where this money would go, I've got a pretty specific breakdown. I can send you that information after this as well. So to close out, I would like to ask you not to think about the last event that you attended, but think about the next event that you'll attend and possibly use TixBuyer. Thank you. Questions? Yes, sir.
What do you get with the membership again?
So that is something that we're working on. It becomes easier to create a membership when we have partnerships, right? We could offer tickets, we could offer discounts, we could offer all kinds of things. That could very possibly be pushed into 2021. And I've been told to focus on the bottom line first.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah?
The 5% fee
We are, so, no, we're not a resale platform. We're not necessarily an exchange in the fact that we don't want to have a quantity of tickets. We don't want to have stock on hand. We buy the ticket as soon as it's requested, or maybe an event that sells out. In that sense, we're an exchange, but we're not resale. We're not passing tickets from one to another.
So that 5% would be on top of any fees?
Correct. So we take the total cost of the ticket and add our fee on top of that, 5 to 10%. Yes.
Any idea how you'll handle defaults?
Yeah, so I mean, we are still a financing, lending type company. There is still an underwriting process that we're working on, and there are the same terms and conditions and things that apply if you don't pay your credit card, your mortgage, anything else. The difference is we're taking a single purchase and allowing users to pay, and so the only instances of default that we've collected simply just by working with people on, you owe $200, how can we split this up over the next 6 weeks, 6 months to get that money back? We've been successful so far in just contacting people. Long story short, we can effect a credit report if need be and collect on those with collection agencies.
But you're not screening for credit.
That we reserve the right to, but the goal is not to ever touch a credit report. So one of the guys that has been working with me, it's been some time, but he works in machine learning, AI, and we've started pulling from social media, emails. We can look at your LinkedIn and see what you do for a living. There are certain things that you can submit your ID and we can tell, okay, you're in the military. There's all kinds of other things that we can use to do the underwriting process.
If your competitors have a head start, what's going to set you all apart compared to them?
I think the biggest thing that puts us apart is the events. We are the first people to be doing this with events. The e-commerce market, shopping physical goods are growing as fast as events are. And so even though they do have a head start with the technology, there's so much more room to grow in apparel and finance and things like that. And I would like to focus more on the experiences, the events. It's a different niche. Go with you first, sir. I'm sorry?
How do you pay it back? Is it 6 months, 12 months, 2 years?
Currently, because I'm funding this out of my own pocket, it's been 4 payments, either biweekly, so once every 2 weeks, or once a month for 4 months. We've worked with a travel company that said, okay, if we can say somebody wants to go on this luxury retreat in a year, but we don't actually give them that spot until it's paid off, can they finance it for a year? That gives us some leverage because if they don't pay and they do default, we don't have to sell that spot. We would like to be able to offer other terms.
Why wouldn't you just put it on your credit card if you're going to pay it back in 2 months?
So the reason we're focused on millennials is there's a very large portion of millennials that don't have credit history, myself included. I have a very cushy job. I'm making good money, and I didn't have a credit card until just recently. Even then, it was a $200 limit. And that was just from a lack of credit history. On top of the fact that there's tons of studies and data that say people, millennial age and younger, want to stay away from credit, avoiding problems of older generations, not buying houses, not buying cars, things like that. So it's the trend.
Have you partnered with a financial service firm, or how are you navigating kind of the lending law and regulations?
So I'm working on it, and part of the budget that I've created is based on staying within those regulations, right? There are certain usury regulations, usury laws, things like that, that you have to abide by. The good thing is we don't charge interest. We've got a very specific model that allows us to get out of some of those regulations. But at the same time, we're less predatory in a way because we don't change our rates. We don't mark up the tickets. And we're focused on one purchase with a limit instead of giving you a credit line of $15,000, $20,000, $2,000.
One more question.
Yes.
Okay, 1 minute.
All right. Last question. Thank you all very much. Oh, last one.
Is there a cap or limit to your risk, like order size on 100 tickets to ACL?
Yes, there is. So in our terms and conditions, again, returning users are kind of allowed to build credit with us. We can raise their cap. We can offer them lower rates. We have kind of a different type of application. If you do $500 or less, there's not a whole lot of information you have to provide. If you do $1,200 or less, then you have to provide a little bit of extra information. So that cap right now is $1,200.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can definitely meet up with him, talk to him more. Sounds very interesting. I know a friend that has in the business kind of like that, but it's on the, he rents, no, he doesn't rent. He financing rims. So he's in the financing business. CBD to me, coming up.
Hey everybody, I'm Dan. I'm here to present CBD to me, to y'all. It's CBD delivery in Austin, Texas. But before I get started, just wanted to get an idea of who I'm talking to. Does anybody here know about CBD? Show of hands, yeah? Who among y'all would be willing to try it? Just have seriously thought about. Cool. So if I told you guys that at the end of my presentation, maybe not that quick, but by the end of our little happy hour, I could get CBD into your hands, be pretty cool. We'd be friends. Then that's what I'm here to present. And
Just click on the side, sorry.
yeah. Oh, thank you. It probably just has a delay. Yeah. So, what exactly is CBD? You might have heard of it lately. As you drive down the road, you'll see CBD signs all over the place. It's a cannabinoid that comes out of the cannabis plant. There's a lot of cannabis plants actually, but this one is specifically Cannabis sativa, which might also ring a bell. There's a few cannabinoids that come out of that plant. One is THC. That's the one that gets you high. And then there's CBD, which doesn't have those same effects. It doesn't have those psychoactive effects, but it does have neurological benefits for you. It has a number of neurological effects, and some of those happen to be beneficial, is a more proper way to put that. There's a big concern about CBD. Lately, there's a lot of hesitation in the space because CBD happens to be related to the cannabis plant for the better part of all of our lives, unless somebody brought their kid. It doesn't look like it. Cannabis has been an illegal, stigmatized, heavily scrutinized plant. The guy outside called it maligned. I like that word. And it's only just now become legal to grow. So in 2018, there was a bill called the 2018 Farm Bill that was signed into law. That was part of the Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018. Basically made it legal to grow, produce, sell to customers. So what exactly does CBD do for people? Why do people care about it? Why is it such a health craze right now? Officially, as in according to the FDA, it doesn't do anything specifically good for you. You can't say that it cures anything, but it is being used by people to help combat stress, anxiety, different neuropathic disorders. It's being used to help people reduce their dependence on opioids and their dosage intake of opioids. That's one of the biggest selling points of it. There's effects on Alzheimer's and arthritis. So big market out there. Lots of people like it. Personally do. That's why I called this company CBD to me, and I started it. So what is it? You go online, you order CBD. There's a client or customer app. There's a store app. There's a driver app. And all three of these will help you, will help us to fulfill orders. That is, you order CBD online, and it's delivered to your doorstep. That easy. There are other people in the space right now that are delivering CBD, selling it online. Amazon will do it. I'll touch in the questions if anybody does want to know why these are actually non-factors. Ease is doing it, which is a company out in California, Oregon, and Washington, where they're delivering literally marijuana to your door. Postmates isn't doing it. Favor's not doing it. But there's a lot of people selling it. A little bit about me. Came out to Austin a little while ago. Not going to tell you how old I am, but graduated from college out in California, and to help me pay for my school, where I did get scholarship, but I did have a lot of fees. I worked at SpaceX, worked at the LA Times, I worked at IBM. I have a strong technical background. I worked in the marijuana industry as well. Worked for a marijuana startup while I was at USC. We worked, basically weren't paying me with money, and I left. It wasn't worth it to me. There was a VR startup I worked with, didn't really go anywhere. And then there was another startup I worked with as the CTO, didn't go anywhere. So that's my track record. I'm up here because I'm looking for co-founders and developers. I believe I'm one of the best people for the job, and there's somebody out here that also could be the next best person for the job. And when I was at school, I took this class with this guy named Noam Wasserman. He's a very smart person, taught a class at Harvard, and he said you should fill your holes. You should look for somebody who can complement your skill set in the best ways. So I need help, and hopefully I can find that soon. Moving slowly, need to move a little bit faster and become the younger version of the tortoise, the turtle. Cool, thank you.
Questions?
So recently I've heard that there is a big quality issue with the CBD market. Does your company screen the products that you would essentially be fulfilling for your customers?
Yes, we work with only stores. We have a few partners that have done that screening themselves. So in the sense that we don't have our own labs, labs are very expensive and those tests are very expensive to run. These stores themselves often don't unless they are fronts for these for their product. But yeah, that is a major issue because there's a lot of solvents that get stuck in there with CBD, and there's often pesticides that will get left in there also. So it's something that has been a concern and is being addressed.
Are you more like Uber for CBD delivery, or are you specifically working with one specific store to sell?
I'm working with a few. So there's a few stores around Austin that I have partnership with, and they're on the platform.
Is there any science on this?
No. Yeah, there's tons of science. It's a very hard one to study because of how stigmatized the plant has been treated in the past. But I will say it's not something that has been very rigorously studied, and that's why the FDA has this hesitation towards it.
Yeah, I'm actually aware that in Europe they use it for everything. So when I heard that this legislative passed, I was actually looking into growing in my farm. But there's so many stipulations to it, it's not that easy to start growing it yourself.
Yeah, it is. So to that, it is being used for a lot of different things. It is being used to help people with anxiety, help people with arthritis. It's significantly reducing the amount of opioids that people are needing on a whatever their addiction demands. So there are some very clear indicators that it's going to be an effective chemical for people, but until the FDA really gets their stamp on it, which is basically a symptom of a rigorous study, it's not something that the government's going to throw wholehearted support behind.
So how do you guys make money?
Commission. So it's a marketing platform, very much like Postmates, Grubhub. Follows a very similar pricing model where take a percentage off the top. For the delivery, to help cover the delivery, we can actually sell a little bit cheaper than what they sell in store. We can deliver it faster than anybody is right now. And we make a very small margin for it. So, yeah. Right
Yeah.
now, that's around 2% on the dollar. So it's like 2 cents on the dollar. But as it increases because of that commission, it can be as large as like, I think it's 8 cents on the dollar.
For the 3 applications you mentioned, are they already built or they're in the process?
There's a customer app that's built. There's a merchant app that's built. And technically a driver app that's built. But there's a lot of backend code that needs to mesh all of them that is in the works.
Who's the target audience? Is it more of millennials who are open-minded and experimenting with this stuff, or is it more like senior living homes where there's 100 senior citizens with Alzheimer's and arthritis?
Yeah, so the kind of inherent barriers to the market entry, I don't know if, basically what prevents older people from using this is it's on the internet and there's apps involved and they're less familiar with using Uber. Youngsters who like CBD or like the idea of the cannabis movement can get involved very easily on the other hand, but I would say seniors have more of a benefit from it because they're the ones that CBD is really most able to help.
One last question.
Are you currently up and running, and how do we find you?
I am not currently up and running. I'm still in an early development stage, I would say. How can you fund me? I don't have a way for you to fund me other than Venmo, Bitcoin, and I've got pockets.
I'm at fine with sorry.
Fine. Yeah. So you don't have an app yet or a website to go to?
Yeah, you can reach me at cbd.app or dan@cbd.app. Our store is on store.cbd.app.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you much.
So at this point, guys, CBD, it's funny because you hear it here, and there was one time some guy pitched here that he was going to create this ride-sharing thing that he can drive his friend from one place to the other, and came a company called Ride Scout afterwards and sold it. So you never know what's going to happen with CBD delivery, right? So I know if probably Uber's listening to you, maybe they'll start delivering too. So that's the problem with that. Oh, they'll buy you. You have to create a lot of customers. That's the problem with them, the acquisition for them. So at this point, let me just go back here and where is it? I have to close some of these companies here. Okay, here we go. Is that showing up now? New computer, guys. Sorry, it's not mine. All right, so going back to this, I will say that I'm gonna bring out Jerry Washley. Xiao is gonna bring him up, and I wanted to mention February 10th next month. We're gonna have Rick Timmons. He's actually with C10. Have you guys heard C10 before? Central Texas Angel Investors. He's an investor himself, and then I believe in March we have another Richard Bagdonas. He's going to be a keynote speaker, and also in April we have Mike. He's with Silverstone's Partners. He's another investor. So definitely want to have you guys come back and check us out. But I'll bring Xiao here so she can introduce our keynote speaker today, Jerry. So give me a second. I'll bring up the clicker.
All right, good evening. Thank you for taking time come out tonight. All right. When I first come to United States, everyone told me if you want to be a rich guy in United States, you better have a good lawyer stand by you. All right? So some of you may know my company was acquired a few months ago by a global giant company. And that M&A deal is tremendous, it's very big for us. But the thing is funny, 24 hours before the closing, then their M&A deal team called us. They found out they have not have the necessary paperwork for our India team. The next day, 8 o'clock, we have to close the deal. We received this news around afternoon 4 o'clock sometime. Think about that. The big deal is closed tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, and 4 o'clock, we found out paperwork has not complete. Anyway, nobody can just complain, right? So that time, everyone was exhausted and went home. And by the night of about 9:55 p.m., we received another conference call invitation from the M&A team, ask us to jump on the call with their India team around 1 hour after. Basically, it's 1 hour. My God, that time I was freaked out. Then I pick up the phone, call our lawyer. I didn't expect him to pick up the phone because I know next morning he need to get up very early, maybe 6 something to do the paperwork. But unfortunately, he picked up the phone and he answered my phone call. There is an old saying, say, if you are being sued, it's too late. Most of us like to hire a great lawyer after we have, most of us like to put off to hire a great lawyer. But my advice is you need to have a good lawyer right now. Please welcome Jerry.
Thank you, Chow. So to be clear, that mess up on the India deal side was the other law firm's mistake, not ours. So we're just so we're on the same page. So I'm a partner at Kastner Gravel. There's some. I think the presentation is going to be made available, so I'll save you the details. The firm's been around. It's actually our 10-year anniversary is coming up. I've been there for 9 of them. Previously, I was at Vincent & Elkins. Everyone comes from the same kind of pattern where we come from national law firms and we're in kind of a boutique platform. We have 17 attorneys. We focus on corporate law, commercial transactions, employment, tax, and a lot on the in-between, but no litigation. A couple of fun facts. We do, just hundreds of fundraising transactions. We've done mergers and acquisitions, collectively in the billions of dollars, and it's a fun ride. As far as the way the firm is structured, essentially 10 years ago, one of my partners from Wilson Sonsini kind of saw a gap in the need of startups and the ability for startups to afford a firm like a Wilson Sonsini or Vincent & Elkins or whatever the case may be. And so essentially we shed the overhead, got into a much leaner platform, and the rest is pretty much history. So a couple of fun facts about me, but I'll let you read that. Disclaimers: I'm not your lawyer. This is informational only, et cetera. Any good lawyer will have their disclaimers page for what it's worth. Oh, the slides aren't going. Oh, sorry about that. Oh, no problem. Oh, well, then that there goes all my thunder as I was scrolling through these wonderful slides. There you go. Is that it? Yes. So you just click on this one. This one here? Yeah. All right. There's the disclaimer page that I was bragging about. So Chow sent me a list of things. My general take is that a lot of the companies that are in here are very early on. One of the first things that you'll start thinking about when you go from just doing it yourself, when you actually go through formation, is, well, what kind of entity should I form? Really, the top 2 choices are you're either a limited liability company, an LLC, or you'll form some sort of corporation. That corporation can be a C Corp or it could be an S Corp. Generally speaking, you have to ask yourself, how are the dollars going to flow through that entity? If you have a really cash-rich flowing business, you would highly consider forming as an LLC. If you're going to take a lot of losses and you want to flow those through your personal tax return, you'd consider an LLC. At the same time, if you're kind of venture aspiring, right, you want to go raise money, you want to have equity incentive plans, et cetera, you're most likely going to be a C Corp. Any company that you know of generally is almost certainly a Delaware C Corp. The reason for that is Delaware is kind of the gold standard for corporate law. If you're going to do a transaction and you need a 1 hour turnaround from Delaware, they'll do it. It's just a matter of fees. The other big thing to consider when you're kind of talking about entity selection is something called qualified small business stock. That may not mean a lot to you right now, but if you set it up properly and you don't blow it via significant redemption, you can exclude 100% of the gains on up to $10 million or 10x your basis, whatever's greater. So to put a finer point on that, you start your company, it goes well, you sell the company, you get $10 million based on your stock ownership, you don't pay any taxes, none. I mean, it's insane when it works out for you. So investors are keen on making sure QSBS status is preserved. You as founders should be excited about what I would consider like one of the greatest windfalls in tax history. I won't go through the details of QSBS, but know when I say significant redemptions, what that means is when the company itself is buying stock back from people outside of a service provider kind of separation, right? Like if one of your co-founders leaves and you buy stock back that's vested, that's a different scenario. Where this usually comes up is when you're raising a round of funding and you're trying to take some money off the table, right? So let's say you go raise a $5 million Series A and you want to take, whatever, $800K, $1 million off the table. You have to be very careful in how you structure that transaction not to blow that investor's QSBS and any sort of QSBS stock that was issued, because there's look back periods and look forwards. And so there are these windows of times where you can really screw people if you don't do it properly, for what that's worth. Let's see if my... I was asked, Chow asked me about, well, can you give some high level on employee compensation? The short answer is employee compensation is more difficult than you would think it is. A lot of times, I think you have to bifurcate the conversation between, hey, I want to create an equity incentive plan and I want to give options instead of having to pay someone. Like that's sort of how it works, right? Anytime you issue securities, you have to have an exemption from registering those securities. So Rule 701 is the securities law exemption. So you can issue options, you can grant stock, you can do those sorts of things to your employees, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to pay them, right? So there are certain exemptions that come into play. One of the big ones that founders rely on is that if you're a significant owner, like more than 20%, then you cannot get paid. But if you're hiring interns or you're hiring other people to do work, then you have to be very careful about whether this person should be receiving minimum wage, whether this person should be salaried, whether this person should be an employee versus being an independent contractor. If there's a silver lining, it's people screw this up all the time, but that doesn't make the problem any less, right? It's just a matter of how much fixing needs to occur at a future time. One of the big ticket items, again, early on is, I'll have folks come and say, hey, we want to grant stock to someone. And the first comment is, well, how much is that stock worth? And I'm inevitably met with, well, I don't know. And the reason that it matters is because the IRS doesn't want you to get something for nothing, right? So if I grant you $1,000 worth of stock, well, you just got $1,000 worth of compensation from a tax standpoint, right? And me as the company, I should issue you a tax form letting them know that happened. Whereas if you get an option and you set the exercise price properly, there is no tax on receipt. So that's why when you're working for these companies, that's why you're getting options instead of straight stock grants. Let's see. I'm going to blow through that one. Trapped for the unwary. Chow, how am I doing on time on my 10 minutes? Good? one of the most everything in corporate law can be fixed, but there are some things that you can't really fix. I'll get to 83B elections in a second, but it's really the vesting restrictions and 83B elections go hand in hand, right? So when you grant or you purchase stock that is subject to vesting, you have to make an election with the IRS within 30 days of receiving that stock, or the IRS doesn't treat you as if you own that stock until the vesting restrictions lapse. Well, what does that mean? So let's say I grant you, or, so you and I are co-founders and we come up with this genius plan to give ourselves vesting restrictions without talking to someone. Perfect. So 4 years, 1 year cliff, right? You pay nothing for the stock because the corporation's just been formed. And then in 6 months, we hit it, right? You didn't, and by the way, in this scenario, you don't file your 83B. So we do a Series A financing, and we're going through the reps, and we see one that says everyone's filed their 83B, and we say, well, what's that, right? Well, what happens is when you get to that 25% vesting threshold, right, you then just got taxed on the spread between what you paid, which is nothing, and the value of the vested stock at that time, right? So if that stock's worth a quarter, if it's 1,000 shares and you vest in 25%, so 250 shares vest a year from now, and that's worth 50K, you just got $50,000 worth of taxable income with no money to pay the bill, right? Fast forward over a longer period of time and you get, who knows, you get acquired for $10 million. Well, guess what? You've been accruing, just potentially millions of dollars in taxes without any money to pay it. So if there's anything that you remember from this, it's if I have vesting, I should really think or talk to someone about what an 83B election is. If done properly, when you get when you take vested shares and you file your 83B, it's a taxable event, but if you pay fair market value, there's no tax. And so it's really just an administrative form. And again, this is one of the few things in corporate law that you really can't fix. The other thing that people tend to screw up quite a bit is IP assignment. What I mean by that is there are really two major intellectual property events in a tech company, right? The first is a dump into the company, right? So the business plan, the idea, all that good stuff. So you put that in the company and then you sign agreements to keep that IP in the company as you go. So when you go do a financing, if you haven't had people sign, your employee proprietary information agreements or independent contractor agreements, it's going to be a problem. If you get to an exit event and you haven't managed to do this, it will absolutely be a problem because you as an investor or you as the acquirer can't have the risk that someone's going to pop up and say this company doesn't own the IP that they're paying money for, right? The other thing, offer letters. Right now, depending on the size of your company, you're probably not really thinking about it. Once you start kind of getting in the swing of things and you're bringing people on, a simple offer letter is going to pay a lot of dividends. The other kind of component to that is if you're going to use offer letters and you're going to mention equity, you should be really tight with the way that equity is phrased in that offer letter. We've had multiple clients, unfortunately, go through litigation scenarios in which you have this offer letter that says, I'm going to grant you X. It doesn't happen or the deal changed or whatever the case may be. And then all of a sudden you get sued, right? Because inevitably that employee leaves and they say they're entitled to something and they really shouldn't have been in the first place. Improper governance. Again, this is something that can get fixed, but it's just better to do it up front properly, right? So if you have a C Corp, you've got to have a board of directors. That's just kind of part of the deal. There are certain things that the board should be doing. And I know it seems silly when you're the only director. Of course I approved it. I'm the only director, right? But you really do need to document those approvals. And when you're doing it, by the way, equity grants, the board always approves equity grants. If you're going to amend your charter to sell stock, well, you've got to have the board and shareholders approve, which kind of dovetails with using unregistered broker-dealers and finders. One, if you're going to sell stock, you have to have that stock. It's got to be available to sell, right? And so the way that you do that is you'd amend your certificate of incorporation to create whatever stock you're going to sell and then sell it. There are unfortunately, a lot of people that are unregistered broker dealers and finders. And what does that mean? So when you sell securities, the SEC is really concerned with the SEC and state regulators, for what that's worth. You may remember our, I think he's still our Attorney General, Ken Paxton. He got popped in Dallas for doing this very thing, right? He took a commission on a sale of securities, and so our Attorney General got sued, right? The point is, if someone says they will help you raise money and all they need is a certain percentage of the fundraise, I can almost promise you they're violating the law. And you, by association, are as well. What does that mean, practically speaking? Is someone going to come knock down your door? No. But could you be the Ken Paxton where somebody gets pissed at him for whatever reason and picks up the phone and turns somebody into a regulator? I don't know, maybe. The more prudent or more practical issue is that you will inevitably introduce what are called rescission rights, so you use someone who's unregistered to go sell securities, you've now tainted the entire round. So even though you have like legitimate people buying your securities, they now have a get out of jail free card, right? They can ask for their money back at any time, and you gotta pay them back, right? And so bad things can happen. Just ask the person when they offer to help you fundraise whether they're registered. They're probably not, and in that case, you should talk to someone about how to properly structure that transaction. Fundraising. Probably the question that we get the most on fundraising is, well, should I use a convertible security? Should I sell it? Use a bridge note or a safe or something else, or should I just sell stock? Should I sell common stock? Should I sell preferred stock? The first question is really, it's just a matter of valuation, right? If I have a company and I'm starting it and somebody says, hey, I'll give you $5 million pre-money, and that is within an acceptable range for me, I would sell equity, right? If someone says, I'll give you $50,000 pre-money valuation and I get half your company for 10, whatever, I guess that'd be around 20K, maybe that's not the right vehicle to sell it. So convertible securities will allow you to punt that valuation question down the road. There's nuance associated with doing that, but if you can't get the valuation you want today, a convertible security is a really nice way to kind of get that conversation down the road. It'll also give you an opportunity to kind of build some value in the company and then go out and raise again. And so just because you're raising, I think maybe you had 500K worth of safes or bridge notes, whatever the case may be, just because you're raising 500K or want to raise 500K, you don't have to do it all in the same terms necessarily, right? So you can take a subset, maybe 100K or 50K on some terms, it may not be all that great, and then go raise another 250 on some terms that are a little bit better than the last 250 or 200 in this scenario, on terms that are even better than that. And so you want to be careful when you're entering into these agreements, because you have to think about how all this stuff fits together, because what you don't want is to get to a Series A financing and all of a sudden you've given away 70% of your company because you basically killed it at that point, right? You've become practically unfundable depending on what you've done previously. Another question that we get a ton of is, I've got some friends and they're really cool and they just want to give me some money and they're not accredited. What does that mean? So accredited investors are folks that basically they're higher net worth individuals. So you have to have, there's an asset test where it's $1 million in assets excluding the principal value of your residence. So you don't get to count the equity in your home toward this asset test. Or there's an income test, and I always tend to blank on the income test, but it's somewhere around 200K for individuals. Or maybe somewhere in that neighborhood. So anyway, it's someone who makes good money, right? And the point is the SEC and the state regulators don't really care if you lose your money if you're making money. What they do care about is if your buddy makes 50K and he writes you a check for 25K, if half of his savings or half of his net worth is going to your investment, you've probably got issues, right? There have been a lot of regulations really since 2015 to kind of loosen up non-accredited investor investments. But if you're doing targeted rounds with non-accredited investors, you're almost certainly screwing it up. I mean, for what that's worth. How am I doing on my 10 minutes? Good? So essentially, like, I could go into a lot of detail on any one of these points. I find it usually more helpful for groups like this to ask questions. I'm happy to answer anything that I can. Again, I'm a corporate partner, so there are limits to what I do, but I'm happy to answer questions. Yeah, what do you got?
What are the biggest traps you see for startups that are hoping to franchise?
It's a great question. So franchise laws it's a very distinct body of law, and I don't really do that type of law. Generally speaking, there is a fair amount of regulations around franchises, because essentially what you're doing is selling interests in businesses to folks. So I would say you need to speak to an attorney that specializes in franchise law on that one. Any non-franchise questions? Yes.
It's kind of a
No.
broad general question, but I mean, for a company like mine, right?
Yep.
Fairly new, we're mostly free revenue.
Yep.
I've talked to several different lawyers that are startup lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
They have a sole practice by themselves, and they've kind of done what you guys are doing. They've exited to a larger corporation or whatever it may be. When do you suggest bringing on a lawyer part-time or connecting to a firm like you to start implementing some of these things?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. So the general rule of thumb is it's always cheaper to do it right straight out of the gate than to DIY it, because what I do is not rocket science, but it can easily get screwed up by someone, not even just like, entrepreneurs, but by other attorneys who don't practice this type of law. You can screw it up. So my general answer is the more that you can do on the front end just by researching, you can significantly lower, your legal spend. So for instance, on a convertible note, if you've never heard of a conversion cap or a conversion discount, and you don't know what an automatic conversion is, or qualified financing, just like these basic terms that you can get on, whoever's blog and pick up, and I'm educating you on it, I'm happy to do it, but it may not be the best use of your time to hear me walk through it. Now, at the same time, there are a lot of kind of strategic considerations when trying to set the values of those, but really just getting kind of a baseline understanding of kind of the nuance is really helpful. But that doesn't mean that you should become an expert on it, because that's why you hire experts to help you.
So I guess what he's trying to ask is, at what point should we just go after your company and say, hey, we got an investor now, let's go see how they can write all these options, and then, or do we go before we set up the company and find, let's say, my friend here, he's going to develop for me, and we're going to split the,
Yeah.
at what point
Really, it really should be at formation. That's in an ideal world, right? So you come and you say, hey, we're going to start a business. We say, okay, here's an formation questionnaire. We're going to talk about setting an equity incentive plan. We're going to talk about vesting restrictions among the founders. We're going to talk about, basic, really what we try to do is get you set up in a way that you can just go spread your wings, right? And where you come back to us is when, okay, well, hey, I want to go raise some money. What do I do? Right? I need a term sheet to go float by some investors. Or I brought on somebody who wanted grant options to them. What do we do? That's kind of the general flow. We have, obviously, we have clients from formation. We have clients who just show up and say, hey, I've already signed this term sheet. Can you help us out? That works sometimes. And when I say sometimes, it's hard to unravel what you've agreed to when you didn't realize that, maybe there are some non-market terms in the term sheet that you were signing up to, and then we're having to pull it back, and that can get tricky. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess the thing is, I'm sure you have an hourly rate.
Oh, yeah. So,
$400, or do you have like a package for formation, a package for, hiring employees and stocks and stuff like that?
yeah, so every law firm will have some sort of a every law firm that plays in this space will have some sort of a package, right? I would say just reach out and talk to a couple of different attorneys to get a feel for what they're doing. The unfortunate part, candidly, if I'm sitting in your shoes, it's really hard to tell who is kind of good and credible and is gonna set you up properly. Even if you're having the conversations with me, right? There are folks that aren't very good, candidly, that it's hard to tell when you're just unless you kind of know all the background at that point. Why do you need that particular person? But yes, it's expensive generally speaking, to kind of go through the proper steps, but it is much, much more expensive down the line when it's been messed up out of the gate. Yeah.
Question on the convertible notes. Seems like we work with a lot of companies. I do some accounting work.
Yeah.
They always want to do convertible note, always want to do convertible note, and they try to set this value cap, and there's always so much issues with it, and then they don't even end up raising money anyway. Like, do you ever tell companies, like, hey, if you only have $100,000 valuation, like, why don't you just set up an annuity to your stock? Or
So,
convertible notes really that popular and
yeah. It's a great question. Convertible notes are very popular. And the reason why they're so popular is because they give the investor something that they want, which is priority in the event of when things go south, right? Because it's a debt-like instrument, and they're cheap to kick out, right? Like for me to do a convertible note financing, we could do it really fast. Generally speaking, right now, if everybody lawyers up and we're kind of in the weeds, well, then it slows down. But the point is they're generally speaking an easy, quick way to bring on money. Valuation caps, with some companies, I would say that really just have no idea, or maybe it's your 100K situation. A valuation cap may not be the best way to spend your time, right? There should be a discount in that note, right? So maybe you give a 20% discount on conversion. And then depending on who you're selling to, maybe you add like an MFN clause, so a most favored nations clause that says, hey, if I end up negotiating a cap with somebody else, I'll give you the same deal, because we all know that like we don't really know what that valuation is. The other thing to keep in mind with valuation caps is that it's not meant to set today's value. Like done properly, that valuation cap is meant as a investment protection for the investor. So for instance, like for an early stage company, for whatever reason in Austin, call it 2 to 5 million is what you'll see those cap prices at. That does not mean your company is worth 2 to 5 million. What it does mean is if you go out and raise at a $10 million valuation using my money that I gave you, me being the investor, well, then I'm not going to get completely washed out. Right? Because if I'm raising at a 15 and I came in, I gave you my 50K at a 3, I'm going to still get a decent amount of equity versus what I would get if I only had that discount. And so if your investors are trying to kind of push you toward this mindset that's really a valuation, you should very quickly steer them away and kind of discuss this whole, it's really to protect you from getting washed out in a wildly successful event. Yeah.
Do you have any good resources that cover this sort of like from an introductory point of view, like a book or a website?
Yeah, so actually Gordon Doherty, he's one of the principals at Capital Factory. He wrote a book recently, and I thought it was well done, and it kind of goes through a lot of these concepts, and I think it's very approachable for what that's worth. Other places to look, so Cooley it's a big national firm. They're great lawyers there. They have Cooley Go, which is kind of like an education type platform for entrepreneurs. Like it's actually pretty good stuff, even though it is Cooley. A lot of the VCs will put out propaganda, right? Some of it you have to take with a grain of salt because it's being written by the VCs, but it's worth taking a look at. Yeah.
What's the name of the book?
It is Startup Success. Is that right?
Early stages of your venture.
Yeah.
We're actually going to have him be a keynote speaker later this year, so he'll be announced.
Yeah, Gordon's a great guy, and again, I think that book's it's very approachable, and it's kind of like nuts and bolts of like, how do I raise money? What do I do? Who do I talk to? What are the terms? Like, what do I sell? That type of stuff. Yeah.
What would be a good example where you want to set up multiple
Yeah, no, I mean, so how about I'll flip it and say, where do I see multiple legal entities that we work with? When you have international subsidiaries, right? So like with Chow's company, we had an Indian subsidiary, we had a Chinese subsidiary. Those are all kind of parked in different areas. Sometimes you'll have, interestingly enough, when there are limitations on like, call it like SEO, right? You can set up subs and buy more AdWords, right? So sometimes you'll see it in that way, just to kind of skirt around those rules. Otherwise, sometimes you'll have an opco, so an operating company down here, right, where all the employees sit, et cetera. And then you'll have a parent co or a hold co up top where all the investment's going in. And so sometimes the folks down here get to participate up here. You'll see this kind of hold co structure a lot in private equity. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
Are you familiar with the slicing time method for dynamic equity splits and bootstrap startups? And if so, do you have any opinions about it?
Dynamic slicing. No, I don't know that I've heard that. I can give you my take. I mean, I don't know what it is. I'd be happy to talk with you about it later. What I will tell you, just generally speaking, is you want to try to just keep things simple. So sometimes we'll have founders that are like, oh, did you see what the guys at Facebook did? Or did you see that, what the guys at, I don't know, Twitter did, or whatever the case may be. Sometimes those solutions are very elegant and they're rolled out very thoughtfully. And sometimes they're just not really meant for really early stage startups, right? And so as an investor, and so so a little bit of background that I kind of blew through earlier. So I do mostly company representation, but I do a fair amount of investor representation as well. And on both sides, if we see this really goofy structure, it takes away from what the investors really should be focused on, right? The investor should be focused on your business instead of, well, wait, what do these guys do? And so all of a sudden we're in the weeds on kind of maybe dynamic pie slicing or whatever the case may be, where it should just be like, well, what are your, what's your ARR, your MRR, whatever metric that particular investor is focused on. But happy to talk to you about it afterwards. Yeah.
You mentioned taxation earlier on.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, do you work with the research and development tax credit at all for your startup clients?
We don't do R&D tax credits. There are accounting firms here in town that my understanding is they do good work with it. When we're touching tax, it's usually in structuring like either an M&A deal, or it's with some sort of an equity grant scenario, or those types of situations, but not necessarily in the R&D grant side. Yeah. So Kickstarter funding, so I've had various experiences with Kickstarter. In some ways, it's a wonderful way to get some traction. And if you can raise money without having to give any equity, like that's kind of cool, right? But if you promise to deliver something, you have to deliver it, right? Or it's going to cause problems for you. I can tell you that for sure. So, to the extent that you've got a widget and, you need 25K and it gets funded and you promise to give discount codes or whatever the case is, great. The situation where it gets a little dicey is that, candidly, you've got a bunch of yahoos that gave you money, and if things don't go exactly as planned or you pivot and you don't deliver, now you got a bunch of yahoos that are upset, right? And so you have to be careful about that. Yeah.
So for the co-founders, if you got like two best friends or a married couple, say, and they wanted to start a company together and split equity, would you recommend going like a 51-49 versus the 50-50?
It's a good question. It's a good question, right? Sometimes what you'll see is, so for a company that's going to kind of rapid growth and expansion, I don't get as hung up on a 50-50 split. And the reason why is because if you guys can't figure it out amongst yourselves, then you've got a lot more problems than the equity split. That being said, it's always nice to have some sort of tie-breaking mechanism built into the documents in that scenario. And that, because if you don't, and the company is successful enough for you to actually like get into a fight and not push it forward, then who gets to decide what happens? It's the courts, right? And they don't know your business as well as you guys know the business. And so you can. There are a number of ways to set tiebreakers up. Oftentimes, especially if there's someone else in the cap table, right? They're a really good resource to do it. Sometimes it'll be you'll punt it to a third-party arbitrator or mediator and let them provide the guidance. But it can get tricky, I guess is a good way to put it, for what that's worth. Any other questions? All right, well.
Meant on the question about Kickstarter, somebody did a Kickstarter for Unicorns e-scooter. I don't know if you heard of that here in Austin.
Mm-mm.
And they shut down because they couldn't get funding, but they used all their money that they raised to marketing Facebook. And they never develop a product. And you can search for it. And
Yeah, and that's like a really good way to get sued, right? Yeah, and you know, like as with everything, I'll tell my clients at the end of the day, sometimes like if we're looking through a more aggressive strategy on doing whatever we're doing, the one thing that you'll very quickly learn in the law is that being right doesn't matter a whole lot. And what I mean by that is just because you're right, especially in like a litigation scenario, doesn't mean that everyone around is going to have to go through a tremendous amount of pain for you to be vindicated, and maybe you won't get vindicated at all, right? And so, again, with the Kickstarter example is a really good one where, you know, one of the core general tenets of corporate law is that you don't want personal liability, right? You don't want, you know, if the company goes away, who cares? I mean, generally speaking, but you don't want them to like go after your kids, you know, tuition fund or whatever the case may be. If you stay within the bounds of the corporation, you're generally okay. The thing that's scary about the Kickstarter stuff is that once you start dealing with consumers, you start bringing in this whole body of law called like the Deceptive Trade Practices Act, which is actually out there for businesses as well. But you can do some damage inadvertently. And so you always just, like, again, if you're going to do a Kickstarter, I would say be very transparent on what you're going to spend the money on, and, you know, do what you say, because you could find yourself in a not so great situation.
Yeah, I think that deceptive trade ad is what, 3 times the amount you can sue for?
Yeah, there are treble damages that you can get in that scenario. I mean, really, so there's only a handful of instances where personal liability can flow. And usually it's when you're doing bad stuff, right? But that doesn't mean that, you know, you want to avoid the situations in which it can arise, I suppose is a good way to put it. Yeah.
I'm sure this is a really formal question, but I was wondering if you have any sort of heuristics in mind that you could give out in terms of tackling the really just the chaos of what to me is like a legal ocean.
Yeah. So I represented an investor that did, so you're doing the CBD, right? So I represented an investor recently that made an investment in a consumable CBD product, right? So we hired special counsel out of DC that was, you know, cozy to the FDA or allegedly, to try to figure out like what's going to happen, where are we, you know, where are things going? And the short answer is no one knows, right? And what I mean by that is, so you've got the Farm Bill, but then you have the FDA coming out, I guess, probably in the last 3 or 4 weeks that said, hey, we are not going to say this is safe to consume, which was kind of a shock to everybody in the industry. Then you have states where in New York, right, in Manhattan, they're pulling CBD off the shelves. In Texas, surprisingly, they're letting it sell. They're letting it flow. And I mean, and so every you're in a unique industry. You're really just doing delivery services, but the CBD industry in particular is a tough nut to crack because there's really no good information. I would say, how do you figure it out? It's no matter what you're doing, someone else has probably written a white paper on it. Law firms, big law firms especially, really love to push out updates. So to the extent that you're, you know, doing stuff in the CBD, I would find some law firms that are credible in that space and sign up for their newsletter, because they're going to be pushing you information. Anytime they can market, they're going to market, right? And that's a nice way to kind of stay up to speed on those types of things. Fire 83Bs. Yeah.
Are you aware of a lot of litigation around IP infringement that, might be something that we need to be aware of, and how much of that happens? And, I just read, it's very discouraging that T-Mobile has patented or has a trademark rights on that color magenta. It's crazy.
Yeah.
How much of that is out there?
So I'll back up just a second, and I will answer your question. One practical tip: if you're coming up with like a new whiz-bang company name, go to the TESS database. Like the USPTO, Patent and Trade Office, has this database called TESS, and you can do basic searches, and you can see if someone has the name that you're considering trademarked. You may need some help interpreting the results, but at least like if you put in CBD to me, you can see if somebody else has trademarked that, right? So for what it's worth. So before you buy a bunch of websites and whatnot, like go check it out. Have I heard of any specific litigation from an IP infringement standpoint? The answer is no. It obviously happens, right? The patent system, in my opinion, is sick, because you could, for a while there, you get a patent on basically anything, I'm pretty sure. And the way that they were construing those patent claims, they just stretched farther and farther. Luckily, there's been some reining in. So, the Rocket Docket in East Texas, it was what they called Marshall, where all the patent litigators were filing because you could push cases through really quickly. That's kind of gone away. So the short answer is, like, I haven't heard anything specifically. If you ever get a invitation to license, your ear should perk up, right? Because that means somebody thinks you're doing something that they have rights to. The one thing I will tell you as early stage founders, you don't want to go searching for patents on what you're doing, right? Because once you have knowledge of a patent, you can introduce statutory damages in a way that can magnify your issue. And so it's if you're concerned that you're treading too closely to something that you think is out there, you can always hire or talk to a patent attorney to have them do something away from you, so that you at least put a shield between the knowledge imputation. Because if you have knowledge, if you're a knowing infringer, you can again cause treble damages.
Do you deal with trademarks?
Trademarks, a little bit, yeah. Yeah, we have a firm in town that we work with, and they do great work. So, yeah.
Okay, is there a difference between filing a trademark or copyright formally with the USPTO and actually just like claiming that as?
Yes.
I keep a little TM on stuff, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, does every single one of those, have they been like filed with the USPTO?
No. The short answer is no. Again, I'm not a trademark lawyer, so take it for what it's worth. You basically, so for instance, the Capital Factory, right? So there are, Capital Factory has a brand in Austin. And even if they didn't file with the PTO, if someone tried to open a Capital Factory in Pflugerville, they're probably not, Capital Factory is going to have the ability to shut them down, because there are common law trademarks that exist. So just by your use in commerce, you are establishing rights around your brand. Now, if there's a Capital Factory in Seattle, I mean, it's a little bit tougher deal, unless Capital Factory goes and files a trademark application with the PTO, and then you get federal coverage, right? That's when I was mentioning that TESS database. There are means by which you can tell if somebody else has filed a trademark, and you kind of go from there. But the short answer is, when you see TM, it's an unregistered trademark. When you see the R in the circle, I sometimes forget that. But anyways, yeah, the short answer is you can, unregistered copyright, like if I like wrote on this piece of paper, in theory, I've got an unregistered copyright on it, right? Yeah?
So if I work nights and weekends,
Yep.
would my company own some of the nights?
Oh, that's a really good question. I blew through this earlier on my point. You have to be very careful about what you're doing, and you need to go back and find the employment agreements that you sign to see how far-reaching that employee proprietary information agreement is. Generally speaking, right, you can do stuff on your own time, on your own computer, as long as it doesn't relate to the business of the company that you're working for. So a good example, let's say I worked for Oracle, right, and I was a PL SQL guy. Well, if I wanted to start a pinball company and I was doing it on my own time and on my own computer or whatever, pinball machines, Oracle is not going to own that, generally speaking. Now, if I, as an Oracle employee, came up with this whiz-bang idea based on information that I learned at Oracle, and I start a relational database business, even though it's on my time and on the weekends and on my computer, I probably don't own it, right? Because again, it relates to what the business is. So you should look at your EPIA. Sometimes those provisions are embedded in an employee handbook, but you should take a look at them to see, you know, where the line is so that you're kind of on the right side of it.
Good example, I think there's a company that started here in Austin that got funding, and Apple is suing them because of that. So I guess in the database system, which Apple is not in the, I guess they're not in the infrastructure.
Yeah, but it's related. It's something that Apple could conceivably go in, and so they'll hook into it. The other thing to consider, like when you're kind of going from one company to the next, in Texas, there are enforceable non-competes. If you work for a tech company here in town, you probably signed up to one. If you didn't sign up to a non-compete, there's could be a non-solicit in there, so you can't call your buddies at Oracle and say, hey, guess what? I got this great startup. You should come work for us. You can also see non-interference clauses. In California, non-competes are unenforceable, right? And so you wouldn't include that. So if you're taking, you know, you call your lawyer and say, hey, I really need this great form, so I have, you know, an EPIA, and they give it to you, and it's based on Texas, and you just swap out Texas for California and send it over, if you watch Silicon Valley, you can see what happens, right? Like that's not the way it's supposed to go. Yeah.
Who's working for a California company in Texas?
That non-compete's enforceable. It depends on where you, the employee, are. So Apple can absolutely put a non-compete in their Texas forms.
So as long as you put like California law in the contract and like it is unenforceable.
No, because you know, you have to be, I mean, obviously if you have if Apple gives you an agreement, it's governed by California law and they put a non-compete in it, I think that'd just be really poor drafting, right? But generally speaking, you have to look at where the employee is. And so if the employee started in Texas and then you moved to San Francisco, well, you can't get out of your non-compete by doing that, right? For what it's worth. But if you started in San Francisco and then you moved to Texas and somebody tries to get you to sign a non-compete, same company, the enforceability starts getting a little bit harder to pull off. Yeah.
If I have a contractor relationship with someone to work for a client of mine and they quit or get hit by a bus or I have to fire them or whatever the case is, I guess, have you ever had this experience and what protections would you put in place to allow for the employer or the person, the contractee to protect their information to be able to continue to serve their clients or compel that contractor to give them information that they need that was developed for a certain company?
Yeah, I think I track. I mean, when you engage with an independent contractor, right, ideally you'd put them on your forms because you know what they say. Your form ideally should cover things like confidential information. It'll cover who owns the intellectual property. It'll cover things like you can't go develop the same project for, you know, company X. It'll cover those types of things. So if you have an appropriate agreement in the scenario in which you're talking about, you know, you would have, well, first, any intellectual property that was created should be yours, right? Any confidential information and any of the stuff that they're developing should be kind of where where you should have access to it. I mean, if you think about it, just generally speaking, there are some practical things that you can do depending, and I don't know what your business is, but if you've got a developer that's developing code, maybe make them check it into your stuff, right? Like, don't let them hold the entire project over here on the side that you don't have access to. Because even if we have a really strong agreement, the person that controls that stuff is going to be in a position of leverage. So the short answer is you should get an agreement that kind of handles that situation. And then the practical advice is have them put whatever they are developing into a place that you control. Yeah, you have to be careful when you're engaging independent contractors and you don't have an agreement, because the default will be that that they'll own the IP, right? Because the essence of a contractor is they're doing it for lots of different people, right? And so as a baseline matter, like, if it's a specific work made for hire, then maybe you'll be all right, but you would be I know I'm saying something that is already dawned on you, but you want to have agreements that are very clear on who owns what and what they have to do. Any other questions? File your 83Bs. For real?
Thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I have a lot of questions actually, but I think I don't want to keep everybody here tonight. I think you guys want to go back to networking, probably have a drink or so. So I'll turn the music on. Make sure you guys come next month, and don't miss out. Bring your friend. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we got going on, and in the startup world, and helping people just connect with others. So again, I'll turn the music on. By around 8:50, I'll shut it down, and I'll go ahead and ask you guys to clean up after yourself, because your mom is not here to clean after you. So I appreciate you guys coming tonight. Thank you guys.
Come along when they gather around the pile talking. That's when Billy will take me walking through the backyard and we go